Hello, Kordak Radio. I am live after Carol. She is so sweet, and I'm not. It's a hard act to follow. I hope you've been listening to Kordak Radio today. We had a great lineup. And in fact, I was busy during the middle of the day, but then my wife and we were just watching it kind of delayed Vanessa and Geraldo Lemos Neto. I would recommend everybody go back and listen because anytime Geraldo speaks, it's just wonderful. It's just you always learn something new, and it's always exciting. And of course, Carol's wonderful. I watched the last part of her show, and she is just such a wonderful person. Now, now you have me. So what are we talking about tonight? So this is 4th of July. And I want to talk about politics and government. But first, let me say this about politics. I know everyone, and every generation thinks that the country is the most divided in the politics, and one side's worse than the other. But if we learn anything from Spiritism is for us to go on the hello, Matthew, to be on the 10,000 foot level and know that politics, while are important, but they're about as important as, when you had your student government, right, in high school or whatever. That's about as important as it is, right? It's not anything to lose sleep about. You may, if you live in a place where you lose your civil rights and those things, and you have to protest. God love you, and I understand that. That's up to you how strident you want to be. But I would like to remind everyone, hello, Sarah Liz and Sol Souza. I'd like to remind everyone that we are born into the place, into the culture, into the gender. Hello, Vanessa, into the gender we are in order to learn. So if we're in a repressive government, that's something for us to learn. Maybe we were part of that repressive government. But the main thing I want to say is politics, it should be somewhat deprioritized from your life. I should be on the audio streaming, Vanessa. It should be on Kardec Radio. If I'm not, let me know. But it says I am connected to Kardec Radio. Are you not hearing me? Let me make sure I'm talking so that you can hear me. I'm hoping that. Can someone let me know if they can hear me? Oh, okay. I'll just assume that we're okay because it seems to be working. So I would say is don't make it don't lose sleep over it, and don't worry about that. That you just agonize over one party or the other person's in office or not. It is not that important to your spiritual life, right? Your spiritual life is more important. But that's not to say we should not all be involved, right? And say, okay, you can hear me on Facebook. And I believe I am streaming. It actually says streaming on my streaming app for Kardec Radio. So I hope that is working. So let's go on with the government. So I talk about this in a book of mine I've written, which it's called The 1,000-Year March Towards a Just Society. Oh, that was too much. Sorry about that. Somehow I hit 2. Take this one down. That's a different book. And I talk about this. What type of government does the spirit world want? And I get this information a lot from the different spiritist books I've read, but a lot of it comes from On the Way to the Light, and of course, and the Spirit's book. But On the Way to the Light by the wonderful spirit Emmanuel, which really is just a wonderful book. Tells us about the history of the world as it was guided by spirits. So the first thing for us to realize, Vanessa says I'm in. Good. Yeah, so I thought I did that. So the first thing for us is, as I said before, is the spirit world is actively moving us to manage ourselves in a civilized manner, right? And surprise, we don't do it very well. And the answer is, well, because we're human, right? So I think we all realize that. So what I've got this information is the book On the Way to the Light and other spiritist writings lay out the track for us to follow to improve the governments of whatever nations we reside. Now, Spiritism has existed for over 150 years since Allan Kardec published the Spirits book. And the book states in the conclusion section, the development of these ideas present three distinct periods. The first is that of curiosity, excited by the strangeness of the phenomena produced. The second, that of reasoning and philosophy. The third, that of applications and consequences. My belief, it is time now for application. It's time to apply the principles that a decent society must follow, should follow. These principles and why the spirit world has guided us to them is the topic of what I'm going to talk about tonight. In the body of books written by spirits and psychographed by mediums such as Francisco Chico C. Xavier, there exists commentary on how the spirit world desires the human race to govern itself. And the foremost discourse on this subject, as I said before, is On the Way to the Light by the Spirit Emmanuel, psychographed by Francisco C. Xavier. The book was written in 1938, first published in English in 2011. And I would recommend everyone to read that book. You can go to my site, nwspiritism.com, and click on the picture of Allan Kardec. It'll take you to the EDICI bookstore, and there you can find this book. You can find the Spirits book. And I've said this every time, but you can find all sorts of good books. You can also find them on Amazon if that is, what you would like. So, what are the concepts we are supposed to gather, right? And the interesting thing is within On the Way to the Light, the principles of government are discussed and their effects on society throughout history are examined, measured, and graded by the spirit world, resulting in a recurring theme of values that are encouraged and even planned for by the spirit world. Why should we care that we should live in a society guided by these doctrines? Because great plans have been made and attempted to create a just government, and when it failed, the world descended into a dark age. Reflect on Emmanuel's comments about the plan of the spirit realm concerning Rome. This is what he said. Today's thinkers who dream about the creation of the United States of the world, devoid of the hate-filled actions of fratricidal wars, can delve into the plans of the invisible realm during that time in Rome's history. So Emmanuel wrote that the spirit realm selected Rome as a possible world leader because of the Republican ideals of Rome and their emphasis on the family. This is what he said. With the help of education and love, the Roman family could unite the banners of the orb, thereby creating a new route for the collective evolution and laying down parallel lines for the physical and moral progress of humankind. Every effort was made towards that end by the emissaries of the invisible realm. And the proof of that grand plan of unifying endeavor is that the Roman Empire was one of the finest in terms of education for the organization of modern nations. So then he goes on, he says, essentially the Roman ideal became corrupted as Rome developed its empire. And this is what he said. Abuses of authority and power soon intoxicated the valorous city. The entire seat of government seemed like it had been overrun by an avalanche of evil forces from the lower spheres of the invisible plane. So even as, if you caught Vanessa's and Geraldo's speak earlier, they're talking about how dark forces always try to corrupt us. And believe me, they have been extremely successful. And I know, when I was in the mediums meeting, I was told I had been not very good in positions of power before. They did that to me too. It's my fault, of course, my responsibility. But being human and being imperfect, and as was said just before, as Carol said before, we should listen to our conscience, right? And our problem is we rationalize away why I can buy these votes, or I can, take money from this person. I can do this, right? This is why we're going through what we're going. And the spirit world is always trying to help us become better and uncorrupted, right? Honest. It's very important to be honest. So Given the downward trajectory of Rome, the spirit world abandoned the plan of Rome's leadership and allowed it to fail, like so many empires before and after. And Emmanuel describes the results of its failure. That's what he says. The Roman Empire could have affected the founding of a soul state on the planet due to the marvelous unity it achieved, and thanks to the effort and watch care from on high. But instead, it disappeared in a sea of ruins after its wars, aberrations, and circuses filled with wild beasts and gladiators. So, this is a fate we must strive to avoid. This is one of the reasons Spiritism was delivered to the world. And also, I like to tell people, I've read in other books that the future of Earth isn't meant to be a one world government. It's meant to have different areas, as far as what I've seen from the Reverend via Owen. So, Patricia Verse, boa noite. Well, oh, thank you. That's the On the Way Light is a good translation from the Portuguese. Whoever translated that did a wonderful job. So, this is one of the reasons Spiritism was delivered to the world, to help facilitate the development of worthy governments in our nations on this planet. And I believe, and people can, other Spiritists can say I'm wrong, but I think it's time to start the third period of applications and consequences, as stated in Allan Kardec's The Spirits book. And the application in this instance is the acceptance of our collective responsibility to adhere and to actively promote the ideal form of government, which would allow our sphere to stand beside other planets on a higher level. Now, as I said at the beginning, let's prioritize this, right? We don't have to kill ourselves. And I want to reiterate, right? The means do not justify, right, the end. That's not true. We have to do this stuff through peaceful means, right? The end justifies the means. No, I'm sorry, reverse that. The means must justify the end as far as being well, brotherly, fraternally, and charitable. Forgive me. So, we have to stand up for those ideas. And the principles emphasized by the spirit world are the foundation upon which we should base our future governments. Principles that we should not only admire, but strive to implement. Governments and politicians that violate these doctrines should be peacefully removed. And the principles of the spirit world that have encouraged and actively endorsed, and please add to this in your comments if you would like, but these are what I think are the main ones. One is freedom of religion. There should be no one world religion. That's what Spiritism says all the time. We're just hopefully other religions will take this doctrine. Oh, well, thank you, Gabrielle. Freedom of speech and thought, right? Freedom of speech. This is something, boy, I think we've all seen in the last 5 years or so. People are trying to assault, even in places, United States and Europe, they're trying to assault the freedom of speech and thought. Personal ownership and self-discipline, extremely important. Promotion of scientific advances. Protection of the family. Limited government. And then lastly, no aggressive wars. Now, let me go in detail to each one of these. So let's talk about freedom of religion. And let me tell you where I got this from. Because what I do, on the books you'll see on my site, nwspiritism.com, what I do is I take Spiritist writings and I try and combine them in the themes and say, okay, this is where I found this, is where I found that, and try and give a whole and give an explanation of what I think the process and what the spirit world is actually trying to tell us. It's just my humble interpretation. So please feel free, anyone, always to say, no, I think you're wrong. Free enterprise. Yes, Matthew. Yes. Free enterprise, I think, is part of that. And that's part of personal ownership and self-discipline. So let's talk about freedom of religion first. Jesus has sent many emissaries to assist our growth on earth, right? China was blessed with the ancient teachings of Confucius, who lived 500 years before Christ came to our world. And Confucius, as Emmanuel explains, this is what Emmanuel said about Confucius. As a missionary of Christ, Confucius had to immerse himself in all Chinese traditions and accept the imperious circumstances of the environment in order to benefit the country in its ability to fully comprehend. Moses was sent to the Hebrews, Socrates was given to the Greeks, Muhammad was sent to the Arabic tribes, and centuries afterwards, Allan Kardec came to France to codify the Spiritist doctrine. All serve to reinforce the central ideas of our Savior, as Emmanuel states after surveying different religions. This is what he says. The truth is that all religious books and traditions of antiquity contain the same substantial unity. The revelations evolved in a gradual sphere of knowledge. All refer to the unpersonifiable God, who is the essence in all life in the universe. And in the traditionalism of all of them beats the sublimated vision of the Christ, who was awaited everywhere on the globe. So, as part of the freedom of religion is the freedom for religious tyranny. The spirit world does not intend to promote a one-world religion. They realize the urge by men is too great to abuse their power. With power comes corruption. With corruption, the central purpose of a religion is not to stimulate our spiritual well-being, but to accumulate wealth and maintain position. Emmanuel describes the effect of an all-controlling church. This is what he said. Ensconced in the immense riches and possessing all power and authority, the church rarely grasped the duty of love that its educational mission entailed. Neither does the spirit world wish the government promote a state religion. As an example, Emmanuel reports that in the year 756 AD, he said at that time many sovereigns made use of the church according to their personal desires, granting ecclesiastical titles to the most corrupted consciousness. So he is telling us religion is meant for the benefit of the incarnated, to contribute to the education of the preferred path of life, not as another controlling institution alongside government agencies. The spirit world wishes us to prepare humanity for the eventual rise of Spiritism. In support of this, we must hold fast the right of the people to choose their method of worship and spiritual enlightenment. Emmanuel actually maps out what must occur. On its mission as consoler, Spiritism is the support of the world in this century of decline in its history. Only Spiritism, in its characteristic of renewed Christianity, can save the religions that are vanishing amid the collisions of power and ambition, of selfishness and domination, and point humankind towards its true path. And also remember, this book was written in 1938, just as the war drums were beating in Europe. In fact, the war had already gone on in the Japanese-Chinese conflict. So it's important to let people have the freedom of religion and not have government in control of it. Now let's talk about the freedom of speech and thought. So the concept of personal freedom and independent thought is one the spirit world has emphasized since the dawn of man. And they created Western civilization as the beacon of freedom and democracy for the world precisely because we have been rigorously selected to attain this goal. Emmanuel writes of the Renaissance, which was planned by the spirit world. Right after we had Rome, they put in the Dark Ages, and they said, okay, we're going to brighten up. The invention of the printing press facilitated incredible progress in the world of ideas, leading to wonderful expressions of intellectual life. Literature took on new life, and the arts reached heights unreachable by future generations. Numerous artisans of ancient Greece reincarnated to Italy to leave indelible vestiges of their passages in precious marble. So this is what's so interesting about these writings. When you look at books like On the Way to Light, you see how the spirit world will take these special spirits, right? Artists, Da Vinci, right? Michelangelo, and they were probably famous Athenian artists or wherever in Greece, right? And they put them in Italy, right? They put them in Florence or Rome or wherever. And this is how they subtly guide. They're not always successful, right? People go off the wrong path and so forth. But when you can take pieces on and off the chessboard and move the pieces wherever you want to, you're going to get what you want eventually. It may take you longer because we humans on Earth, are not the brightest people right now. We're not we're not the spiritually maturest, which is not really a word, people right now, but you're going to get to where you want to go. I'd also like to remind people is that, this Western civilization we have now has been one of them. In fact, on the way, like they even talked about, there have been Atlantis, Lemuria. There's been other civilizations that they have just brought down because the human civilization went up and they went technologically advanced, but spiritually they were not. Hopefully, what spiritists tell us is this time's the charm, and we'll be allowed. In fact, I'll do another program on after July 19th, which is coming up really quick on Chico's prophecy of, if we can make it 50 years after men were on the moon from 1969, July 1969, that we would really, a lot of good things would happen. And I believe that really would get us on the way to become a planet of regeneration. But let's keep talking about the spirit world right now. So after the Renaissance in the 18th century, right, arose the wave of philosophy and science, which came from high order spirits. According to the manual, they took this group of people and they reincarnated them chiefly in France, right? Voltaire, Montesquieu, Rousseau, D'Alembert, Diderot, Grisney, all influenced the forming of the New World. The manual actually states, the Americas, North and South, destined to receive the sacred experiences of Europe for the civilization of the future, sought to apply the grand principles of the French philosophers to their political life on the way to a more complete emancipation. Yes, Matthew asked, everybody says, he said, would that explain ancient advanced technology? And I think it does. I look at these programs and I see these little hints. And yes, I do believe that. I could be wrong. They could be other artifacts. I'm not sure. But that is what I believe, that these civilizations are there. And when you're talking about tens of thousands of years, it's not amazing that we haven't uncovered much. So, and one of those grand principles, right, that the French said was the freedom of speech, right? And of course, most of us know Voltaire said, I disapprove of what you say, but I will defend to the death your right to say it. So how much more direct could you be? By that simple sentence, Voltaire set in stone our right to free discourse. Wouldn't you wish that more people would think the same? Let me give you an example of why it's so bad to stop the freedom of speech. Now, this is what's happening on campuses and on YouTube now. I mean, YouTube is censoring people. I mean, I think it's horrible. I think it's wrong-headed. Think of the country Yugoslavia. They had strict restrictions on speech. And think of what happened after it tore apart with the different factions, Serbia against Montenegro and Muslims against the Orthodox Christians. They just fought, they were just horrible. There was horrible wars there. Wouldn't it have been better to let people speak and say stupid things like, oh, we should kill that group because, they wear their hat backwards, right? It's much better to let people talk, expose ideas, than to have these ideas not discussed and then come out and then actually people start believing them and not have the time to say, no, that is incorrect. This is why I am so disappointed of the way our culture is going right now with all the political correctness. I think it's setting up. It could set up a bad time. Hopefully, this will be self-corrected and people will rebel against it, but not let it happen. But this is why I believe it's very important to have the freedom of speech and thought. And then what else is that Montesquieu postulated, and I thought this is really the best, is political liberty in a citizen is that peace of mind that comes from the opinion each person has of his safety. And to have this liberty, the government must be such that a citizen cannot be afraid of another. And what are we living right now? People are afraid of another. People are afraid to say, I'm for this person or that person. That's not a good way of doing it. We need to correct that. All of us need to be compassionate and easy and say this. Go ahead and speak. I may disagree with you, but I defend your right to speak. So, in essence, freedom of speech. How many of us take it for granted? While on all sides, even those of us who live in free countries are guarded in what we say, and even attempt to mask our innermost thoughts. I know people who work in any type of company has to do that. And in Britain, and in Germany, if you say the wrong thing, they'll come in at your house and on Facebook or whatever, they'll arrest you. That's why we must actively protect our rights, or what occurred during the times of the Catholic Inquisition could indeed happen again. In fact, I think it is happening. Hopefully, this will be stopped. Because as an example, the Catholic Church wanted power over people's thoughts. The Inquisition was the method to accomplish this nefarious deed. The spirit world strongly condemned the Inquisition. And before I read, let me read this quote. The repression of the heresies was the pretext for the church's consolidation in Europe, becoming the punishment and misfortune of the entire world. This is why we can't allow this to happen, right? Countless other examples may be found in modern times. Communist countries such as North Korea, Cuba, and the extinct USSR were guilty of the severe repression of speech and thoughts. In North Korea, if you failed to show sufficient remorse during the funeral of Kim Jong-il, the deceased dictator of North Korea, who died in 2011, you were hauled off to one of the North Korea many concentration camps. Currently, as I said before, we have the advent of PC, political correctness, so strict as to stifle debate and punish those with a legitimate point of view. The Spirit's book unambiguously condemns this type of behavior. In question 839, is it wrong to scandalize those whose belief is not the same as our own? And the answer is, to do so is to fail in charity and to infringe on the freedom of thought. Right from the Spirit's book. As an example, many people are afraid to discuss religion publicly. Those that do are looked upon as simple or ignorant in our more sophisticated, so-called sophisticated circles. We must resist the temptation to remain safe and silent. We must calmly and logically state our beliefs and allow dissent, with the knowledge that at least we are keeping the tradition of the friendly debate open and alive. Now let's go on to the next. Personal ownership and self-discipline. And I think, as Matthew said, it implies free enterprise. Let me get into it and say how that is, because that's people's self-discipline and making their own choices to move capital around. So, Spiritism, at its core, is a recognition of our duty to improve ourselves. This responsibility extends beyond our mind and body to those around us, society, and the resources of Earth. The regime of responsibility extends to our role in society. After the defeat of Napoleon, the French established a constitutional monarchy, borrowing from the American Constitution and retaining the Enlightened Code, Napoleonic Code, which was established equal protection under the law and the freedom of religion. Now, just as a little aside, a wonderful section in On the Way to the Light talks about Napoleon. And Napoleon was actually reincarnated to get France in order. And the Napoleonic Code was one of his more important missions, except he kind of went off path a little bit and started conquering other nations. And Emmanuel said, there's a great sentence in the book, goes, yeah, as soon as he attacked, and I'm paraphrasing, as soon as he attacked Egypt, we knew, oh well, that's not going to work the way we thought. So this shows you, spirit world's always having to deal with us kids. So Emmanuel expounds upon an event. These reforms establish a regime of individual responsibility in the mechanism of every sector of the state, in addition to all of its political and social advances. So this sentence, better than any other in the book On the Way to the Light, summarizes the type of responsibility each of us should have, right? We all have responsibility. Each sector has responsibility. The state, the political class, the social class, they all have responsibilities. We are not destined to be slaves or untouchable aristocrats, but a multi-layered society of a range of contributors, from poor to wealthy, lazy to hardworking, dim to intelligence, all placed in their respective spheres to learn the required lessons we have been assigned in our life. Look, people are on different levels. There was this great section in the book, Hell Christ, which is about, I think, 200 years after Jesus in Rome. And there was a section saying there will always be managers and workers. And that is because we're all at different levels of spiritual maturity. And therefore, some of us will have to be the bricklayers, right? Because that's the level we're at. And some of us will go higher. Some of us would be the managers because we've gone through the bricklayer stage and we're at another stage. So this is why the earth has to be able to handle all these very diverse groups, is because they're all here to learn in their own manner, right? And that's why the notion that we should live in a world of the same outcomes without any regard to our individual effort is self-defeating for our quest of enlightenment. So this is why, no, not everyone should be given the same house. Not everyone should be given the same responsibility. Not everyone should be given the same, salary for whatever they do. No, it all depends on our self-discipline and our work ethic. This is what the spirit world wants, because we're at different levels. Emmanuel states that Spiritism demonstrates the need for personal ownership and careful reflection of how we use the resources given to us. That's what he says. With the truths of reincarnation, it explained the absurdity of absolute egalitarian theories and work on restoring the true way for human progress. Therefore, what they're saying is we are the stewards of our life and property, not the government, not the church. We, each individual, need to be self-disciplined people who expect the same of others. When those who make bad choices fail, they should be allowed to reap the consequences of their actions. How else will they learn the lessons presented to them? Still, society should help those in need, in temporary need, right? Emmanuel described the positive deeds of Athens. They took care of the poor and disfavored areas of society. They welcomed foreigners, oversaw labor, and encouraged trade, industry, and agriculture. So we should help those in need, but that doesn't mean we should allow dependence to be a way of life, because we're actually hurting them in their life, in their present life. We're actually retarding their spiritual progress. Aiding people during a time of absolute need is one thing. Enslaving them in a cocoon where every choice grants them the same benefits are another. Spiritism teaches us the importance of fraternal love and charity, but also the recognition of the law of paying for our actions here on earth. Emmanuel describes our intended state under the doctrine of Spiritism. This is what he says. Teaching the law of compensation on the path to redemption, as well as the trials of the individual and the collectivity, Spiritism implemented the regime of responsibility, wherein each spirit had to enrich the list of its own qualities. Due to its understanding of individual effort and labor, it was not deceived by utopias of absolute equality. Because of its awareness of the imperatives of human solidarity, it did not become an instrument of oppression for the maintenance of wealth and power. So now let's stop right there. It's like unbridled capitalism, right? With people just cheating and getting money any way they can. That's not good. Communism, socialism, where you take money from everybody, no one knows anything. No, that's not good. It's a self-discipline that everyone has to be aware, right, of their own responsibilities towards themselves and others. Let me finish with this quote. Okay, it was unconcerned with all revolutions because only evolution was its arena of activity and experience, and kept its distance from all wars due to its understanding of the fraternal ties that unite the universal community. Instead, it taught true human and national, familial and group fraternity, enlarging the concept of economic justice and correcting the fanatical spirit of extremist ideologies. What is he saying? Is that we truly are responsible for ourselves and accountable for our efforts to promote a society where individuals are able to better themselves through the fruit of their own labors and to reap those benefits to use in a manner of their choosing. Now, let's go to the next item. I need some water first because I'm probably talking too long already. Promotion of scientific advances. The spirit world says that scientific advances, it follows the concept of personal ownership and self-discipline for a good reason, right? Without the ownership of ideas and the willpower to see concepts to fruition, the ability of our society to create scientific breakthroughs would be severely handicapped. The spirit world doesn't want us to go live in a cave and be a hermit, right? Or to be in a monastery and do nothing. Some people, that's fine. We are made to be out in society, take place in society, and be productive member of society, helping ourselves and others rise with us. The spirit world wants us to be a more innovative society. In fact, as Chico Xavier said, places like No Solar, right, are like 50 to 100 years ahead of us because they're already planning the next innovation for us to use. During the medieval period, Emmanuel cites Roger Bacon as one of the important figures in setting the scene to prepare Europe for the Renaissance. Roger Bacon was an English philosopher and Franciscan friar who was an early advocate of the modern scientific method. Emmanuel lamented the role of the Catholic Church in retarding progress. This is what he said. The Church, however, prohibited examination and free opinion, thereby harming the evolutionary boom, especially in the case of medicine, which, disregarding the close observation of all the facts, surrendered to magic, causing serious harm to society. So, in essence, the spirit world has actively contributed to our technological advancements in order to generate the necessary leap forward in our intellectual progress. It's all part of a grand plan. The spirit world arranged the reincarnation of brilliant minds to assist our development. Emmanuel describes how events were manipulated in the past. That's what he says. In the 18th century, it began with the equally renewing struggles. But higher order spirits of philosophy and science, reincarnated chiefly in France, would fight against the errors of society and politics. This was then followed up in the 19th century by another push to advance for us Western civilization. Emmanuel writes not only about Allan Kardec, but the support that was planned for him in bringing new ideas to the world. This is what he said. On his mission of enlightenment and consolation, however, Allan Kardec would be accompanied by a plethora of companions and collaborators whose regenerative work would manifest not only in matters of a doctrinal nature, but in every area of intellectual activity of the 19th century. Science in those days made large strides that would lead to the height of the 20th century. Our spirit guides do not want us to wallow in a static society where knowledge never changes or it is difficult to distribute under the fear of discovery, right? Maintaining the atmosphere for enabling and protecting individuals, whether via formal legal processes, a patent system, or the acknowledgement and celebration of a new discoveries constitute a significant measure of a successful society. Let's go to the next, protection of the family. So the protection of the family is a central question for our time. And the importance of the family for the spirit world can't be overstated. Let's begin with 3 passages from Kardec's The Spirit's Book. Question 695, is marriage, that is to say, the permanent union of 2 beings, contrary to the law of nature? And the answer was, it is a progress arrived at by the human race. Question 696, what would the effect upon human society of the abolition of marriage? The answer is really short. The answer is a return to the life of the beast. Question 775. What would be the effect upon society of the relaxation of family ties? The answer is 4 words, a relapse into selfishness. Notice the short answers to the questions, as if they needed no further explanation, and the truth was staring you in the face. Only the first question requires the modifier. The question stated the permanent union of 2 beings, which was the custom and law of that day, whereby divorce was extremely rare. The situation led many couples into years of unhappiness. A further statement in the Spirit's Book qualifies it, which is question 940. Is not the lack of sympathy between persons destined to live together also a source of sorrow, and one that is all the more bitter because it poisons an entire existence? And the answer was very bitter it is. And if you're talking about couples that just, can't stand each other, it's not good. The answer is very bitter it is, undoubtedly, but it is usually a misfortune of your own causing. In the first place, your laws are at fault. For how can you suppose that those who dislike one another can be intended by God to live together? So, according to the spirit world, not all marriages are perfect unions, right? Since they are the product of people's free choices, it may be one of the many lessons we must learn in our lifetimes. Therefore, people are allowed to withdraw from a bad marriage, but how and why, and when that is accomplished, might incur debt, which may have to be repaid later. So always try to leave honorably. The next qualifier is yes, a successful family is made up of two kindred spirits and souls that see each other and the possibility to improve themselves beyond what they could achieve alone and to assist their partner in the same quest. And also late in this first book, when they also say a spirit can come back as either gender. So the families of any type, even same-sex families, right? But just protect that union. Two people that can help each other, two spirits that can help each other, try to be honest and charitable and fraternal and help, right? And if it doesn't work out, try and not that I was successful, and try and get out as honorable as possible. So to examine further about families, in the book Missionaries of the Light, a spirit instructor discusses marriage and love on earth. This is what that person said. Love on those lower planes is like gold lost in a large quantity of ore, demanding great efforts and laborious processes to reveal itself to the experts. But among those humans who do in fact are proceeding towards your elevation, the sexual union is much different. It entails a sublime exchange, a pair of spiritual energies, symbolizing divine nourishment for the mind and heart, and creative power not only for children of the flesh, but also for generous deeds and achievements of the soul for life eternal. So, what does that mean? The spirit world considers the family a vital measure of our ability to grow into a just society. Rome was first considered a candidate for world power because of the reverence of the family. Emmanuel describes his admiration for the institution of the Roman family. Compared with its forerunners and successors, the glorious traditions of the Roman family entailed the most sublime respect for the heroic virtues of the wife and a full understanding of the duties of a husband. End quote. Therefore, the spirit world expects us to create a society that nourishes the family, one that reinforces the concept of raising responsible children in a loving and morally enriching manner. A society which pays single mothers to have more children, which trains its sight on creating dependent generations of people with little incentive to escape government largesse, is not a society that should be supported. Whereas all of us should help families in need, absolutely, it should be done with the aim of allowing family members to attain their independence in order to fulfill their planned course of trials and tribulations here on earth. Families should have the opportunity to allow one of its members to stay at home to raise a child, if possible. I know in this society, money is so important. People think they have to have two-income families. But if possible, let one stay home to raise the children, do charity work, or support the other spouse in their endeavors. We need to refrain from supporting a society that practically forces couples to work in order to feed their materialistic desires. We need to restrain governments from overtaxing, whereby both spouses must go out and toil just to feed the ever-enlarging government intrusion into our daily lives. Now, limited government. Let's talk about limited government. In their quest to determine the optimal system of government which fits our human condition, the spirit world deliberately set in motion competing forms of government. Having a long history of tribal and kingship ruling experiences, they knew these types of organizations did not promote the correct atmosphere for individual and collective improvement that was required for us to become more mature. They used ancient Greece to survey a range of regimes from totalitarianism to democracy. Emmanuel surveys the trials of various forms of government in ancient Greece and compares the results to the regimes that existed in pre-World War II Europe. This is what he said. Many of the scientific theories that have caused such a stir in our time as ultra-modern innovation were known in Greece, whose master laid their true foundations. Grand experiments were conducted in matters of social doctrine, and an abundance of teachings were divulged. And as we consider the modern conflict between the totalitarian, fascist, or communist state, thank you, Vanessa. Yes, family first. Between the fascist or communist state and the democratic republics, we ought to look back at the past and see Athens and Sparta as two political symbols that make us ponder how similar to our own times ancient Greece actually was. Sparta So he's saying it's like Sparta was allowed to take the tradition of paying tribute to the state to a new level. They created, it is very fascinating. Sparta is fascinating to read about. Creating a society where the individual was completely subservient to the state. The all-powerful state consumed the entire energy of its people. At least its free people are relatively free, not the poor helots. So, and they were dedicated to, constant training for battle, right? They had for their own enslaved people, they killed them ritualistically every year. And as to their credit, for a time, Sparta manufactured the best warriors and army in the world. Spartan discipline and training was the envy of Greece. Emmanuel describes how invasive the Spartan lifestyle was. This is what he said. Spartan experienced the absolute existence of the state. Did it not display the same characteristics as today's, and he's talking about in 1938, as today's Germany and Russia? Remember, Russia was under Stalin. It was, they were both bad. Spartan law prohibited trade and condemned culture, restricting personal taste because of the enhancing of sentiments of life, right? It decreed measures of isolationism and treated foreigners badly. It instituted a uniform dress code and took over the education of children through the organs of the state. But it did not cultivate the intellectual aspect, shaking the entire sacred edifice of the family and often creating a regime of robbery and denouncement in detriment of the noblest purpose of life. So, one could replace the name Sparta and substitute Communist China during Mao's reign, right? And be astonishingly accurate. Governments that begin espousing the absolute equality of all citizens as interpreted by the state become over time in control of a ruling elite. Elite who has one set of rules for the people and, of course, another reserved for the chosen few. Sparta, like the trajectory of Communist China today, eventually degraded into a corrupt oligarchy, right? Because really, it's amazing. China is more of a fascist country than a communist country right now. So, but by the mid-5th century BC, land had become concentrated in the hands of a tiny elite, and the notion of all Spartan citizens being equals had become a farce, right? Emmanuel closes out his thoughts on the experiments in Greece with the conclusion that a democracy which protects individual freedoms and restricts the role of government to not intrude on our personal life is the preferred option. This is what he said. Thus, Sparta went down in history as a mere culture of soldiers spreading destruction and the calamities of war, but with no constructive significance for humankind. Athens, on the other hand, was the birthplace of true democracy, a nation that loved freedom deeply. Its dedication to culture and the arts initiated other nations into the worship of life, creation, and beauty. So, in my opinion, Spiritism was introduced to us not only to help our personal faith, but to lead the way to a culture of freedom where each individual contributes a set of values, where the onus is on us to regulate the laws and power of government and to support others in their time of need, not to cede our fraternal responsibility to distant public institutions. The Spiritist doctrine was presented to remind us of that fact. As Emmanuel discussed the weakness of the socialist ideologies that were formed in the 19th century and the precepts of Spiritism. This is what he said. Due to its understanding of individual effort and labor, it was not deceived by the utopias of absolute equality. So, according to the spirit world, the aim of government is not to create an environment where a soul is reincarnated into a welfare state, where government supplies all the necessities and allows the truly lazy to do nothing to improve themselves. Perhaps for some as a trial, but not as a general rule. Socialism, as practiced in Europe and the United States, is an artificial construct, where for a significant portion of citizens and designated corporations, there are no consequences to their actions. People can choose not to study hard, never to look for work, help no one, or a multitude of other activities we see on a daily basis and never pay the price of wrong decisions. The same is true for companies supported by the state. Boy, I've worked for them. They are mostly inefficient institutions. Society would be better served by alternatives selected by the marketplace. Emmanuel explains how Spiritism is able to assist in our relationship with government, is what he says. With the truth of reincarnation, it explained the absurdity of absolute egalitarian theories and worked on restoring the true way for human progress. framing socialism within Christian postulates. It had no illusions concerning external reforms and concluded that the only meaningful renewal was that of the inner self. The spirit world, so what he's saying, the spirit world doesn't desire a world of equal outcomes for all. The spirits are meant to strive for different goals, right? Each one of us. Life must at times be hard for some and easy for others, and vice versa. For each may grow and pass their intended trials. Therefore, we have a guide to the limits desired by the spirit world. Government should be an enabler of personal creativity, personal charity, personal achievements, while providing a safe and just environment to attain our desires. Government should provide services, but not solutions for their citizens. Now, I understand why a lot of people think these things should be, because if you study spiritualism, you think about the spirit world, and there was a great line, and I can never find the page again, in the book by Yvonne Pira, Memoirs of a Suicide by Camilo Branco. And he said, well, the spirit world is like a paternalistic socialist society. And he's right? Because in the spirit world, thought is action. You don't need to manufacture things. You don't need to have, it's in everyone rise by meritocracy, right? The spirit world, and I think a lot of people want these utopias because somewhere in the back of their mind, they think, well, this is the way it was in the spirit world. Everyone was given things. And of course, everyone was just naturally self-disciplined. Well, the reason everyone was naturally self-disciplined in the spirit world when these people came from one of the levels of heavens is because they earned that. They earned that level. The people who weren't self-disciplined, who were materialistic or selfish, they were all in the lower zone. They were not there yet. Whereas on Earth, we are on this mishmash of all sorts of levels. That's why it doesn't work here. Maybe someday it will, when everyone is self-disciplined, everyone is equally charitable and fraternal. But that's why it doesn't work. Now we have to know the limits of our human collectivity, right? Okay, the last one is no aggressive wars, right? While the spirit world does not condone wars of aggression, they do allow nations to defend themselves. And one such example is the Islamic excursion from Spain into France in the 8th century. And during this period, Islam had conquered a large part of Spain and already occupied some of France's territory. Emmanuel reports the spirit world effectively blocked any further invasion by the Islamic forces. This is what he said. They did not go beyond the Pyrenees because the spirit realm had established a boundary to their advance by sending Charles Martel to defeat them in 732. So spirit world knows, okay, we'll let you take over this, but then this will happen. On the other hand, Rome is a shining example of unbridled, aggressive empirical ambition and its cost. Not only did it lead to the fall of the empire, but the suffering of many souls who thought they were adding to the grandeur of Rome. Emmanuel describes the consequences. This is what he says. The Roman generals were able to conquer with iron and fire, straying from their most sacred duties and obligation, and by force of arms extended to other peoples the ties they were supposed to forge only with their culture and experience of life. Now, when he talks about Rome, it's funny how it is, think about the United States, of how that was supposed to be that shiny city on the hill. And that's really what we should be, the United States. And think about the spiritist plans for Brazil and the United States. Brazil is the heart, and for spiritism, and the United States is the mind. And none of that entails going out and conquering people and saying, no, you have to be spiritist. No, it doesn't, right? It's leading by example, leading by, with wisdom. Let me carry on this quote. But their action resulted in the bitterest fruits of trial and suffering for humankind. And that is why nearly all of them entered the spirit realm, hotly pursued by their many victims amid the despairing voices of their harshest accusations. After endless decades of expiatory suffering, many of them could be seen without their fine armor, crawling like worms along the banks of the Tiber by holding out their filthy hands as loathsome beggars, right? So their next life wasn't so great, right? They lived the luxury. They were rich and powerful. In their next life, they had to pay for that. Oh, and Vanessa says tonight at 11 p.m. But that's so everybody can see it. Yes, there we go. There's Vanessa. Now 11 p.m. We'll come back for a wrap up on Kardec's 8th anniversary. And that's 11 p.m. Eastern time for everybody who is not on Eastern time. I know these people on the East Coast sometimes get, pretty haughty and they think that everyone knows their time zone. But for those of us who aren't on their time zone, I'll let you know. Yeah, so you're Brazil's an hour ahead, right? So it's an Eastern time zone right now. It's 6:50, but for me, I'm coming from Rio. It's 7:50, so it would be 12 midnight, Gabriel, in Brazil. So another example, and I kind of talked about this before, of the spirits world disdain for war was the mission of Napoleon Bonaparte. Napoleon, as I said before, was originally destined to reorganize the French people after the French Revolution, not to not to subject all of Europe to war and acquire territory. Emmanuel talks about his early victories and how he strayed off the path of his great missions and the resulting magnitude of his failure. And let me put that what Vanessa said. Yes, Vanessa is 11 Eastern time. So everyone can do whatever math they must. So what he did say about Napoleon is, with his victories, he guaranteed the integrity of France, which they were supposed to do, but he spread ruin and misery to other nations. And as he carried out his task, the civil code was organized, establishing really wonderful formulas of law, but he indulged in pillaging and scorning the sacred emancipation of others. So as the spirit will make quite clear, the pursuit of glory, either for territorial plunder or religious reasons, will never have the lasting desired effect. So, in each nation has its own trajectory, right? Each nation has credits and debits. So, what historians see as the natural cycle of conquest and empires is really the functioning of the law of cause and effect, whereby whatever actions are undertaken either by man or nation will result in reaction to mitigate the original deed. That's why we see so many empires expand and then come back, right? And then, also within, they become corrupted. So I hope that helps explain why aggressive empires collapse, corrupt institutions fail. Now, I know you say, well, there's corrupt institutions still around. Remember, we look at our life in this tiny little time frame, right? You got to look at hundreds, maybe thousands of years, right? When we look at the length of one human lifetime, that's nothing. These things, it's like turning an oil tanker on the sea, right? These take time. So corporations, countries, right? Some are destroyed by internal decay, more efficient competition, or unknown causes. But there exists the same law of cause and effect for our artificial creation of states, cities, religions, and other organizations as it does for us. While we go through trials in one life, paying our debts from the previous one, our edifices are subjected to a more direct payback. In the book Action and Reaction, psychographed by Francisco C. Xavier, inspired by the spirit Andre Luis, there exists an explanation of the process. Andre Luis discussed the concept of karma with a high order spirit. Minister Sanzio, the minister, explained how the spirit world accounts for our action. This is what he says. Yes, karma, an ordinary expression among the Hindus, and which means action in Sanskrit, actually implies cause and effect, since every action or movement is a result of previous cause or stimuli. For us, it means the account we must all pay, including our debts and credits. There are accounts of this kind, not only listing and defining individual persons, but also peoples and races, states and institutions. Everything. So yes, we are responsible not only for ourselves, but the society that envelops us. How nice it is sometimes just to say to yourself, I don't care what others are doing, or I give up. All politicians are corrupt. There's nothing I can do. And only concentrate on improving yourself. Unfortunately, we are not allowed to do that. As part of our duty to raise children and help others, we have the responsibility to make sure our children, our fraternal brand of brothers, are left in the better world after we've departed. So what should be our goal? Again, Minister Sanzio describes it best. He says, the good, my friend, is progress and happiness, safety and justice for all human beings and for all creatures we meet on the road, and to whom We must dedicate ourselves exclusively, but without any coercion on the part of purely human rules, which would put us in a false position as regards service, since they would work from the outside inward, very often causing disorder and rebelliousness in our interior cosmos to our harm. Thus, so let me just, thus, what we're saying is, when these despotic governments say everyone has to go there and clean up this and help this, it doesn't do any good. It just makes you rebellious. It should come from the heart, right? You should go and volunteer from the heart. Thus, the good is our willing cooperation with the law. Note the law of cause and effect. On behalf of all, even if it means we have to renounce ourselves completely, we cannot ignore the fact that by helping the law of the Lord and acting according to it, we ourselves will be helped and sustained in the field of imperishable values. And evil will always be represented by that sad tendency of keeping the good exclusively to ourselves, expressed in selfishness and vanity, insensitivity and pride, which portray the inferior lines of the spirit. So, Minister Senziel's phrase, without any coercion on the part of purely human rules, sums up the best aim and reach of good government, one that allows us to strive for good, but not one that dictates our charity and caring, taking away our chance to demonstrate our progression to a higher spiritual state. So, I hope that is of interest to people. I like to tell everyone that every Sunday night at 7 p.m. Eastern, 4 p.m. Pacific, all time zones around, I give a talk on Kardec Radio and Kardec Radio Facebook page. There are, if I can bring this up again, there are all sorts of actually, we should actually get, I just did one too many again, I'm sorry. We should come up a program of who is on Kardec Radio Facebook page at what time now, because I think some of these things have changed a bit, but there's a lot of people, much, wonderful information, beautiful talkers. And then of course it's also on Kardec Radio. Kardec Radio, you can load on your Android through the Play Store or your Apple phone and download it for free, 24 hours a day. Spiritism, as Vanessa said, I think they said over 10,000 people have been listening to Kardec Radio. I look at the statistics every so often, and it's growing. And I hope people appreciate it. Kardec Radio Facebook page is growing. They have a YouTube channel. I have a YouTube channel too. I will post this video on my YouTube and my BitChute channel. Please share this video to other people. Go and subscribe to the Kardec YouTube channel. Subscribe to my YouTube, my BitChute channel. Hit the bell if you want to be notified. I do a lot of 5-10 minute talking about different aspects of Spiritism. And, and my approach is a little bit different than most people. I try and really kind of present, this is the spirit world. These are the processes. Make your own decision how you want to react. Make your own decision of how you want to live within the environment that I'm telling you about, because we're truly on a campus called Earth, and we are here to improve ourselves and help others to improve. And we have the free will to ignore it. But if you really want to ascend spiritually, you may want to think about making some changes and understanding. So, and Vanessa, thank you. Thank you for inviting me on the team. And I think Vanessa also, I recommend everyone to go on, I think it was Fridays at 1:00 Eastern time, that she's now have another person on Kardec Radio. Let me bring that up. And it's spiritismstudy.org by Sergio. And he will do, I think, Kardec after lunch, I believe that what it was. And it's great. This is great. In fact, my family and I, we use this. What he did is Sergio created this book, and it was just the questions of the Spirits book. And so we've tried this at home, and we said, okay, here's the question. Now, what do you think the answer is? And each of us would say, okay, this is what we think the answer is. And it was very enlightening. My daughter got all of them right, compared to my wife and I. Well, thank you. And all the hosts, no, thank you. So go to there. Also on spiritismstudy.org, you can get an appointment with Sergio or I, and I think there'll be other people there that we can talk through Skype, our WhatsApp that's used a lot throughout the world. And I've done that for a couple of people already. And we've had great conversations. We're not imposing anything on you. We can just talk about Spiritism or whatever. It's just very interesting. So yeah, go to spiritismstudy.org. You can make an appointment. They'll send me an email saying so-and-so wants an appointment at 6:30 on Friday or whatever. I'll email you saying, okay, here's my WhatsApp number or my Skype name. Yeah, does that work for you, or or whatever? So we'd be happy to help anyone we possibly can. So I want to say I'm over my time. I want to say good night, everyone, and God bless. God bless everyone.